Hey everyone, this is Sam from WargamerOnline. So we're going to be doing another lore video today. This time it's going to be on the Daughters of Khaine. So this is a very shadowy, secret faction, and it's part of Order, so the Grand Alliance of Order. And I'm going to split this down into separate videos. It's got so much story that it really can't fit into one video, or it probably could, but you'd be here for maybe an hour if not more. So I'm going to break it down. Today we're just going to be looking at the overview of the army, so who the Daughters of Khaine are, generally where they came from, a bit of their, well, a lot of their background, and then we're going to look into some of the individual units and look at what they do and what their role is. I'm going to do another video on Morathi, and that's going to be just on Morathi because she's got so much going on. She's such a pivotal centerpiece for the entire faction. The army wouldn't exist without Morathi, and a lot of the stuff that happens in the faction is because and for Morathi. So we're going to start at the background. We're going to start with a timeline. So who are the Khainites and where did they come from? And it all began in the Age of Myth. As I said, it's from Morathi more than anything. So she got eaten along with the rest of the elves in the end times. So in the world that was, in the old fantasy, Slaanesh basically ate all of the elves and was gorging on them. And Morathi was one of them. She was eaten. And she managed to free herself. She forced Slaanesh to throw up, basically. And she freed herself from Slaanesh. And she awoke, basically plummeting through the skies, and she was flying through the... I don't know how this happens. I don't know how you make a god. Basically, she was in chaos, like literally inside chaos. And then she was puked up and then put back into reality. So she was plummeting from the sky, and she was going down into the shadow realms. So the different mortal realms, they obviously have shadow, light, fire, metal. There's all these different realms, and she ended up in shadow, which is quite fortunate because she can control shadow. And she was flying down towards the Umbralic Sea, and that was in the Hellezar region. There's 13 regions in Ulgu. I might do a video one day on all the different regions and the stuff that we know about them, because they're quite well flashed out, to be honest. Games Workshop's done a good job at putting a lot of information out there for the realms as well. She managed to survive because she did some crazy magic and basically made a ball and then hit the sea, and then she was all good. She didn't get squished. That would be a quick end. So she wandered around for a long time, and we'll go into more detail with Morathi and what the story happened with her in her own video. But basically, she found Malerion. She raised, using shadow magic, she raised the citadel Druchiroth, and that was between Malerion and Morathi, and Sigmar helped the both of them do that. So Sigmar invited them into the pantheon of gods, not Morathi. She wasn't a god at the time, but Tyrion and Teclis were. Because she was eaten by Slaanesh, she had basically been twisted. Again, we'll go into more on that later on, but she was now a giant snake type bat creature rather than beautiful elf, which she was in the old world. So she was shunned because she basically was tainted by chaos, and the rest of the alliance didn't really like her around. So for various reasons she left. She established her own kingdom, and the only followers she had were the Khainite, the elven witch courts, which followed her, and they all basically disappeared. They set up a new kingdom, and they called it Hagg, which is the capital of the Daughters of Khaine. And she wanted to have the 13 realms divided between herself and Malerion. Malerion said, nope, it's all mine. You can have this rubbish piece of land called the Umbral Veil. And he basically saw that as inhospitable. Nobody could live there, and it was kind of an insult to send Morathi there and say this was yours. She used it at her advantage. She made it hospitable, and she taught all of the elven witch courts how to use the realm, how to navigate that small Umbral Veil that was granted to her. And she flourished, rather than dying out and it becoming a problem. She ended up using it and creating a pretty good kingdom, or at least a good base for that anyway. The other elven gods, so Tyrion, Teclis, and Malerion, they basically came up with a plan to capture Slaanesh because they needed to get their elven kin back, because at the minute they were all being devoured by the Dark Prince, basically. And they needed Morathi to do it. So they convinced her. They said, help us for the good of elves. And she said, yeah, no worries, I'll come and help you. So she left, and she went with them, and they caught Slaanesh, basically in between the realm of shadow and the realm of light. There's a place called a Hidden Gloaming, and they dragged Slaanesh there, and they used all sorts of magic to pin him down and then extract the souls. So the elven souls, they extracted them, and they got different portions of them. So Teclis had his own portion. He used them to make the Idoneth Deepkin. Didn't do a very good job. They were a little bit tainted and a little bit messed up. I've done the video on that already, so if anybody wants to know how messed up Idoneth Deepkin are, check that video out. The Tyrion had his own elves, and they're going to be coming out, I imagine, imminently. They're going to be giant angel elves. They're going to be beautiful. And then you had Malerion. So Malerion took his portion, and basically they're all hidden away at the moment. He created monsters, looking at what background we've got so far. So he hid them around Druchiroth, which is the capital of the realm of shadow, and he's basically got these giant monsters flying around. So it's going to be really cool when they get released. So they got divided up, and Morathi went, well, what about mine? They're like, well, you're not a god, you don't get any Morathi. But they couldn't have done it without her, so she got her own portion. And with this portion of elven souls, she put them all into one big cauldron, and she started creating her own army, and she created the Kinarai and the Melusai, so they became her new handmaidens. There's I'll go into more detail on that on her video again, but they basically increased the ranks. She already had a bunch of warriors, she had a bunch of witch elves, and she needed more, so she's created these Kinarai and the Melusai, and they're in her own image. At the same time, the half souls, so when she was extracting all of these, there were some souls that weren't usable, you know, they were damaged. They were kind of like the Idoneth Deepkin, although their entire army, their entire race practically is cursed to a point. Like 90% of the Idoneth Deepkin are cursed, but Morathi had some of these half souls, and with those she created a male working class just to serve the cult. So they're called the Leathanam, and that's it. They're literally human. They're male elf slaves. I don't know how I feel about that, but looking at what the rest of the she-elves go through, I think they haven't got too bad of a time. They're drained of blood daily. They aren't really looked after very well, so they haven't got the greatest life, but that's the way that Morathi likes it. She doesn't like males. She was getting all these elves. She needed land to put them somewhere. You know, they've got all these new people, all these new elves that they needed to have space for. So they purged a load of land for settlement, and they killed loads of different monsters. They killed loads of creatures. They killed men. Sigmar came down and said, stop killing people. And she said, well, they're tainted by chaos, so it's all good. So Sigmar said, that's fine. They made room for new temples, and they expanded massively. So during this rapid expansion, the rivalries basically peaked between the different factions that were in there, and this was known as the Blood Strife. So Hagg queens, so the ones that were promoted and led the different groups of Khaine warriors, basically fought each other for supremacy. They wanted more land. They constantly fighting. When they run out of enemies and they run out of places to purge, they fought amongst each other to try and beat each other. Now Morathi saw this as an opportunity to remove the weakest among them, but also any that were too ambitious. So anybody who potentially could overthrow her or cause issues, she would basically let them die. So it was a good time for Morathi again. She was using it to her advantage. And when she realized that it became a bit too much, she basically used their faith in Khaine to stop it. So the Daughters of Khaine have got this giant devotion to the god of war, which is Khaine, and he was an elven god in the old world. Now all of the elven gods, all of the elves basically realized that Khaine had gone off to fight the chaos gods, and they believed that he had been destroyed to a point. And Morathi knew this. She, as far as she knew when she woke up, because she couldn't renew her appearance just by doing ritual sacrifice to Khaine, which is all she had to do in the old world to stay young. She thought, well, Khaine's dead, but she went along with it just to keep the Daughters of Khaine on side, to get them to be working with her, and that's how she ran it. Now, because Khaine had been destroyed, he'd been shattered into all these different shards, and she used this as a way to get them all together and send them off on holy missions. So she basically said, we're going to do this shard quest. We're going to go and fetch the Holy Grail for us, which is we're going to go and get a shard of Khaine. And she established new colonies all across the realm that were basically designed just to, their sole purpose was to find shards, lost splinters of the Khaine, of the god Khaine. And this basically kept them, give them a mission. It wasn't just fighting and fighting and fighting. They had this holy mission, and the sects, which is what they're called when they're broken down into different chapters or chambers, they're called sects for the Daughters of Khaine, and she established new ones, and they all had different focuses, what they needed to be doing. Each one of the sects had a ruling Hagg Queen, and they generally focused on a major aspect of Khaine's worship. So some of them were looking for shards, like I said. Others were based around single combat, so that was their main focus. They were doing single combat. Others were assassination based, so they would do missions where they would assassinate whoever Morathi felt needed to be killed. Some were just slaughter based. Other ones sacrifice based. You know, they all had some form of key factor which made them different to other sects. At this whole time, you know, they're building up, they're doing all of these holy missions, they're starting to get their own identity and purpose. Sigmar's pantheon of order basically fell apart. Chaos had invaded the realms at this point, and that's when the Age of Chaos starts. So it was all looking good, and then Chaos entered the realms, and then everything turned really dark and rubbish. So the mortal realms took a huge battering during this time, and pretty much everybody refused, or most people refused to help each other, or they locked themselves away. I'm looking at you, Sigmar and Nagash, both rubbish. And they're not rubbish, they're all good. And Chaos, because they had so much of a focus on Azir and the other realms, they ignored the Realm of Shadow for the most part. So the Shadowlands, the Realm of Shadow, really didn't have it difficult at all. The Shadow kept them out. What did manage to get through, though, and continued, was the armies of Slaanesh, because they sensed that the Dark Prince was in between the Realm of Shadow and the Realm of Light. So they knew that he was close, and they continued to try and find him. He was trapped in the Hidden Gloaming, and Morathi keeps stealing souls during this time. She's constantly extracting souls. Now, she was given a certain quota that she was allowed, but she continued to steal even more than that. So what happened was Slaanesh tilted more towards the Realm of Shadow than it did the Realm of Light, which meant that the Slaanesh basically kept pushing through Shadow to try and find their master. And this started the War of Shadows, which is called the Cathtra Duel. And this went on it still goes on. At the moment in time, the War of Shadows is still continuing, but it did pause for a moment. But basically all of the legions of Slaanesh went in and they fought them. The Daughters of Khaine met them. They ambushed them and they took out as many people as possible. The Morathi, basically, to try and do something about this, it's called the Caelic Coven, which is basically a tithe on all of the sects. So each sect sent their greatest warriors, probably not the greatest, probably whatever they could manage or was bothered to send Morathi, and they used those to fight Slaanesh. Now, there was a greater demon called Luxius the Keeper, who was probably the biggest nemesis for Morathi at this moment in time, and he would have trashed the Realm of Shadows. They were doing really well until Sigmar basically emerged from Azir and assaulted Chaos. So this was the Age of Sigmar. This is where we're at the moment, or the beginning of the Age of Sigmar, at least anyway. So Sigmar turns up, all of Chaos basically refocuses, and the legions of Slaanesh retreat to refocus their efforts elsewhere in the mortal realms, which means Shadow is all good. So this is where the War of Shadows pauses for that moment in time, and the Age of Sigmar begins. As Sigmar and his force pushed against Chaos, the Khainites joined them, so they fought alongside the Stormcast Eternal in dozens of campaigns and other Order factions. They didn't always see eye to eye, and they generally fought other factions in Order as well as Chaos. So they had disputes and disagreements that turned into small-scale battles, and there was even wars which happened between the Daughters of Khaine and those that should have been on the same side as them. So certain factions of Order never really trusted them or wanted to fight alongside them. There were others, so there were some of the sects which were the opposite. So there was one called Drachi Ganeth,
who destroyed a Orruk mob outside of a city called Canothia, and they got basically loads of allies. They went, yeah, you helping us, so we like you. And some of the sects were looked upon with favour, others were like, yeah, we don't like you, you're a little bit shady. So it just depended on which sect was actually doing stuff at the time. Like I said, they all had their own personality. So after that, the initial refocus from Chaos into the Mortal Realm. So when they went back and the War of Shadows stopped, Slaanesh basically, once everything had, there's going to be constant campaigns and skirmishes back and forth. Slaanesh basically carried on putting thousands and thousands of mortal and immortal souls back into, or demons and all sorts, back into the Realm of Shadow to try and continue to find their master. So that's when the Shadow Wars continued, and the battles are still basically carrying on now, and the risk of losing Slaanesh from the Hidden Gloaming is basically a huge problem for Morathi, because Morathi needs Slaanesh in that area so that she can continue to extract as many souls as possible. So she kind of wants him trapped as long as possible, plus she hates Slaanesh. There's two people Morathi hates more than everybody else, and that is Slaanesh and Nagash, but I'll go into that more on her own video. So that is a background. I mean, I know I said I was going to do a brief background. That kind of brings you up to where they're at the moment, and the next part I want to go into was the structure of each of the sects, so how they work and what they're for. So every sect has a war coven, at least one, which is their army effectively. Some of them have different armies, so the bigger sects will have maybe 4 or 5, and they'll be made up of a range of different types of units which are in the Daughters of Khaine. Now at the top of the entire Daughters of Khaine is the High Oracle, which is Morathi. So she leads everything. Whatever she says is law, so if she decides something, it happens. She has the iron voice of Khaine. So that's the thing, that basically the Daughters of Khaine are so religious and they're so devoted to Khaine, and they see Morathi as the only way that they can contact, or not contact, but the only link they've got to Khaine, other than all the sacrificial stuff that they do to devote to Khaine. So whatever she says, they do basically, and she knows that. She's got all of the Daughters of Khaine wrapped around her finger. So beneath her, there are high priestesses. Now these are the ones that lead each of the sects, and they can be anything from slaughter queens, hag queens, or bloodwrack medusae. So there's 3 different types of queen and a medusae that can become the high priestess, and that depends on each sect, and it varies. Some might say we're going to have a hag queen as our leader, others will say a slaughter queen. And Morathi, because she can change whatever she wants, can change the ranks. So if she decides that there's a slaughter queen that's done her a favour, or might do some favours for her in the future, she can decide that slaughter queen will be the high priestess for a certain sect. So it's very political. It's very much based around whether it's going to suit Morathi or not. But at the whole time, there's all sorts of different units, different people from different units fighting for potentially becoming high priestesses. And that's the way all of the sects are run. High priestesses, they basically get all of the sacred artifacts. So when they go around and do these missions, they pick up all the really cool loot, and the high priestesses get the best stuff. And they lead the Sisterhood of Blood, which is one of the types of units we'll go into. Now, after the high priestesses, you've got the SCÁTHBORN, which are the ones that Morathi created. They hide in the shadows, they act as bodyguards, and they're also Morathi's most loyal followers. So the SCÁTHBORN are the ones that, if anything shady is going down and anybody tries to attempt to overthrow Morathi, the SCÁTHBORN will feed that information back to Morathi and she can deal with it. They're the most loyal of Morathi's followers. And then finally you've got the LEATHANAM, which are the half-soul male servants, which are basically worker drones for the entire faction. We're going to break these down. We're going to start with queens, then we'll go into the Sisterhood of Blood, and then we'll look at the SCÁTHBORN, and then we'll finish with the LEATHANAM, what are they called? I keep confusing their names. LEATHANAM, the males basically. So the queens, they are high priestesses. They're chosen from the ranks of the Sisterhood of Blood, which we'll talk about in a moment. They're chosen by Morathi herself, and they have to pass a certain ritual to be able to channel Khaine's spirit themselves, and that involves being dunked into a cauldron of blood and all sorts of grisly stuff. But if they manage to survive, they become a high priestess. So it's not all bad. Now, Hag Queens are one of them, so they're responsible generally for mixing the potions and the poisons, and that continues to make all of the rest of the Khainite army go crazy. When they go into battle, they become frenzied. They obviously throw themselves at the enemies, and it's partially due to the fact that the Hag Queens are fueling them with all of these weird poisons and potions and keeping them topped up. Now, that's their main focus, but they also prepare the cauldrons of bloods, these giant war engines that they can perform rituals on them to allow the elves to live even longer than normal elves would. So that's why the witch elves have got this really youthful and beautiful cold appearance. It's because they're able to sustain their life longer than they ever should be able to, and the Hag Queens are responsible for that, or at least in a major part of that. Another cool thing with the cauldrons as well, actually, Morathi uses them for herself, as with everything else. So there's a blood cauldron on the back of each of the war engines, and it never overflows. So the rest of the Khainites believe that Khaine basically takes the surplus of blood whenever they fill it, and it's a tribute to Khaine. But what actually happens is Morathi's put this magic in place that whenever it overflows, all of that blood goes through to her, and it doesn't go to her, it goes to a massive cauldron called the Mathcore, and that's the one that she creates all of her SCÁTHBORN from. So she drains all of this blood, basically puts it into her main cauldron, and that's where she creates her Khainite army. So again, it's something as simple as using a cauldron of blood. She gifts one of those cauldrons of blood to a sect. So when she creates a new sect and it goes into a new region, she gives them one of these cauldrons, knowing full well that, you know, it's helping them, but it's also helping her. Nothing that Morathi does for anybody benefits them for themselves. It will always benefit her in some way, and that's something that I think is really different to Morathi. Some of the other characters in the Age of Sigmar are very selfless, whereas Morathi has to have something out of it, otherwise she won't do it. Right, the next one is the Slaughter Queen. So these are they're the martial leaders, so they're the fighters, more fighting based than the other queens. So these are normally at the front of battle. They're chosen by Morathi for their fanaticism. So they get these crazy dual wield. They dual wield these enchanted blades of corn. So they're almost like a witch elf, which we'll go on to in a moment. But they just carve through ranks when they're fighting in battle. They spin around. They do pirouettes. They're basically like witch elves, but super powered versions of them. Now they also have the ability to shout, and they can rally Khainite warriors nearby. So they're in the thick of it. They hold all of the fighting ranks together. They can also use their voice to shatter incoming spells. So if a wizard casts something, they can just shout at it. Now that reminds me of Skyrim with the Dragonborn being able to shout and stop stuff. So Slaughter Queens are effectively Dragonborn witch elves. There we go. The final of the queens are the Bloodwrack Medusae. So these are chosen by Morathi again, as everything is. Now they have to undertake a ritual called Slithanar. I'm going to pronounce these wrong. Slithanar, and they become a Medusae, and that basically gives them some of Morathi's power and magic. It allows them, they can do a really cool Medusa-style gaze and turn people to stone, and they're basically Medusa in the name. They're really cool. They're a mini version of Morathi. They become Morathi's most loyal servant. So like the rest of the SCÁTHBORN, if anything's going a little bit shady, the Medusae will inform Morathi. They basically become another version of... They're just a spy for Morathi. So they're the three different types of queen. Next, we've got the Sisterhood of Blood. And these are broken down into Witch Elves and Sisters of Slaughter. Now, the Witch Elves, they're the beautiful she-elves. They're normally seen in battle swinging around. They're like a whirlwind of blades, hair, and blood splatter. They have daggers, so they wield these vicious daggers, and they're called the Seancer. And they're holy tools which are built for... they're designed purely for inflicting maximum pain and bleeding. So they've got these barbs and hooks on the actual weapon. So when they stab somebody, it really does hurt, and that's what they want. They want to inflict as much pain as possible, and they want to drain as much blood as possible, because that's what they're all about. Some of these witch elves will take a bladed buckler instead, but generally 2 daggers and you're good to go. Now, they're in battle, they're frenzied. They don't really care for defense, so they wear literally nothing. You know, if you've seen the models, I'm going to put some stuff up on screen, but they very rarely wear much armor, and they basically throw themselves into battle fanatically. They slaughter, they kill stuff, and they devote every kill that they do to Khaine, because that's who they worship. They rip still beating hearts from their enemies, and they also paint the runes of Khaine onto their own bodies. So just imagine some crazy, fanatical, devoted, naked woman with blades, and that is a witch elf. That's basically it. They make up the main numbers in the Khainite army as well. There's, if you see an army of them, there's the Daughters of Khaine, the witch elves will be the highest percentage that's out there. Next, we've got the Sisters of Slaughter. So these are the most public facing of the Sisterhood, and combat is literally everything to them. So that could be in a skirmish, it could be in a shady pit fight, or in a gladiatorial battle. Whatever it is, the Sisters of Slaughter love combat. Now, they've got these barbed whips, which are called a cruiplash, and they also wield bladed bucklers, similar to what the witch elves could use, and they mutilate enemies and they offer the spilt blood to Khaine, similar to the witch elves. But they also have a pretty dark side. They're looked at as an extreme subcult of the Khainite sect, and they have to become a Sister of Slaughter. They have to take a vow of Druchiroth, and they choose the face of Khaine over beauty. So if you've seen these, they've got these metal masks. Now, it isn't just a mask. They have to go through a painful ritual, or an excruciatingly painful ritual, and that uses boiling blood and magic to permanently weld this metal mask onto their face, onto their head. And then once they've done that, they have to fight other established members of the Sisters of Slaughter. And then only when they've done that, if they survive, because blood loss kills the majority of them from this ritual, if they survive, then they become a Sister of Slaughter. So similar to the witch elves, although they've got that extra ritual which they have to go through to become a Sister of Slaughter. So that is the Sisterhood of Blood. Next, we've got the SCÁTHBORN. Now, this is the second category of Khainite. So like I said, there's 3 categories that make up the overall Daughters of Khaine army. So this is the second one. Now, this is the Kinnerai and the Melusai. These are the elite troops of the War Coven. They usually have a higher ranking than the Sisterhood, and Morathi even has her own handpicked honor guard chosen from these ranks. Now, they can also be known as the Trueborn or the Shadowborn, as they're created using the elf souls that Morathi took from Slaanesh. Now, she uses magic, rituals, and her own blood, a very potent mix, to create these, and she puts them into that big cauldron called Mathqua. I don't know how to pronounce that. So she creates them in that giant cauldron. Now, she reshapes these souls in the form of herself. So they're twisted, sinister, serpentine creatures, just like Morathi, and they're split up into different types. So the Blood Sisters, one of them, there's 2 types of Melusai. Now, one of them is Blood Sisters, the other one are Bloodstalkers. The Blood Sisters are allocated by Morathi around all of the different temples, and they're used as the elite bodyguard generally to the High Priestesses, to the, any of the High Priestesses or Morathi. They're basically there to guard. They've got these really huge, heavy pole arms, which are called the Heart Shard Glaives, and they can thrust them through armor just with like the flick of a wrist. They can just pierce armor. They can remove hearts in an instant with them. So they're extremely skilled with these, very similar to Morathi with her pole arm that she's got. Now, at the same time, because of their tainted soul, they can do a special strike called the Scath Touch, which turns their opponent into a crystal statue forever. Now, if they do that at the same time as thrusting through their armor and removing their heart, and then doing the Scath Touch at the same time, their enemy has their heart removed, they're turned into a statue, and they're like that forever. So they're forever in pain, which is pretty nasty. So the Blood Sisters have got a way to torture people if they want to, and they tend to do. Then you've got the other versions of the Melusai, which are called the Bloodstalkers. Now, these are a ranged version of the Melusai. They fire incredibly accurate Hagg blessed arrows. So the Haggs bless these arrows the Bloodstalkers get these bows called Heart Seeker bows, and they shoot for people's hearts. Something with the Daughters of Khaine, they've got a thing for hearts, or at least removing them or shooting them. So that's what these Bloodstalkers do. They shoot straight for the heart. They also have a long dagger, which they use in combat, called a Sianlar. And these are made by Morathi, or they're designed by Morathi, to absorb the energies of organs after a battle's been done. And as you can imagine, Morathi's done it because the energies taken from this are used to strengthen Morathi. So again, like I said before, that anything Morathi does isn't for somebody else purely, it's for herself. So these Bloodstalkers have been created. They've been given these blades which have been designed to literally take energies to strengthen Morathi some more. So that's their purpose as far as Morathi sees. She sends them out, they gather up energy, they give them back to Morathi, and she becomes even stronger. Now that is the Melusai. Then the next ones you've got are the Khinrai Harpies. Now these are a little bit different in terms of how they look. They're similar to the Witch Elves from the Sisterhood, except these fly around with large bat wings. So these are the aerial units of the army. These are the flyers. Now these are split up into a ranged unit called the Heart Renders and close combat units called Life Takers. All of them are formed in the temple city Hagg, which is the capital, and then once they've been made, they're sent on to different temples across the realms by Morathi. So she chooses where they go, and they go. Now the Khinrai Heart Renders, they're equipped with these javelins, long barbed javelins, and they're not normal weapons, they're not physical weapons. They create them themselves out of mist and shadow, and they basically fly around and they throw them at things from the skies, and they skewer their enemies, but they don't actually go down and do anything else. They don't start mutilating the bodies. They literally throw these javelins and then fly on to try and find something else. So they're kind of hit and not run, hit and fly away and kill something else. Hit and hunt, there we go, that's what they do, hit and hunt. The other versions are the Heart Renders. Now these, the Life Takers. Now these are more close combat based. So these, rather than just flying around throwing javelins, these dive into combat from high altitudes, and they have these sickle blades. So they just fly straight down and they swing these sickle blades at the last moment to do the most amount of damage. They also have shields called Heart Piercer shields, and they can use them to either pierce organs or they can parry blows that enemies will do against them. So you've got two different types of Khinrai that you can choose from there as well. So last, we've got the LEATHANAM. Now these are the male population of the Khainites. Usually when a half soul is extracted from Slaanesh, they become just a LEATHANAM. They're a male servant. They're used just to serve the cult. That is it. Some of them become Doomfire Warlocks. So similar to the rest of the LEATHANAM, they're drained daily. As I said before, their blood is used in daily rituals, and they're worked as hard as possible. They're forced to live in poor conditions. They're not treated very well, but for some reason, and Morathi doesn't even know why, that Shadow or someone or something basically allows them to become more powerful than the rest of the males, and they're able to use Shadow themselves. They're able to conjure things, and basically they're more powerful than they should be as far as Morathi sees. Now she sees that as a threat, so they're branded by runes by herself because she doesn't trust the source of their affinity basically with the darkness, and she tells them that it's for their own protection. She's like, oh no, this is for your own good. These runes are here for your own good, so you don't get your soul stolen by Slaanesh, whereas it's actually just because she needs to control them. So these Doomfire Warlocks are the only males, and they're still, drained daily. They're still worked hard. They live in these horrible conditions, and they're looked at by Morathi and the Melusai constantly, so that they're not left to grow out of control, basically. Right, that is pretty much everything I wanted. So in terms of lore, like I said, there's a lot. I apologise if that's a lot to take in as well. I did spend 2 days just reading through all of the stuff that I could on the Daughters of Khaine. I've probably missed out a lot of stuff. I've got the video still to do on Morathi. I've written a lot of notes, and there's so much cool stuff that goes on with Morathi. But the Daughters of Khaine army as a whole is just an incredibly vicious, combat-thirsty melee army. If I have missed anything out, which I will have done, please put that in the comments down below as well, because anybody watching this video wanting to know a little bit more might check the comments and see if there's anything else that could be added to it. Other than that, I hope it's helped. Please like the video if you enjoy these lore videos. I'm trying to get better with them, and I will do more of them if it's what you enjoy watching. So please like the video if you do like it. Let us know if you want me to do more. Let me know what faction you would like me to do next, because I'm just going to go through them as and when I feel like it. So if somebody says, could you do this faction next, then I'll get the books and I'll start reading through them. So it's not a problem at all. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and I'll see you on the next video.